Russia is preparing to open a second front and attack the Baltic countries. Unfortunately, the question is no longer whether this is possible, but when it will happen. Europe's sluggish response to the aggression against Ukraine has finally convinced Moscow that it can get away with anything.
We're feeling quite bored. This is a state of complete stagnation. We want to be on duty.
An attack on NATO seems insane. But the Kremlin has lost its fear because of the actions of Trump in Europe. It is convinced that no one will defend the Baltic countries or the others either. It sensed weakness. What surprised it most was the West's lack of a firm stance, even when Moscow had actually suffered a strategic defeat in Ukraine. Putin's army has been humiliated, yet European leaders are still afraid of him.
The head of Germany's Federal Intelligence, Bruno Kahl, previously stated that Moscow no longer believes in the power of NATO's Article 5, the provision that says an attack on one member of the alliance is considered an attack on all. According to him, the Kremlin may try to test the effectiveness of this mechanism in practice. We are absolutely certain, and we have intelligence that Ukraine is just a stage on the way to the West. There are people in Moscow who do not believe that NATO's Article 5 will work.
Against the backdrop of 4 years of bloody carnage in Ukraine, Putin needs a small victorious war even more. And for him, the Baltic countries are target number one.
These British troops are diligently keeping watch over the strategically important Suwalki Gap, marching through an area that NATO considers one of the most vulnerable and critical on its territory. This vital land corridor, located between NATO allies Poland and Lithuania, as well as Belarus and Russian territory, is a constant source of significant concern.
By many indications, open preparations for an invasion are already underway. The Bashchud population is being warmed up once again for the return of ancestral lands. Now the propaganda is outright claiming that the Baltic countries are still part of the USSR.
They need to be eliminated in a legal sense as illegal state entities, for example, through the courts. Because obviously they seceded illegally, and most importantly, they joined hostile blocs. So their recognition of independence should be revoked as unlawful. In other words, not just recognized. The recognition is not acceptable because it was organized illegally in violation of Soviet Union Law 14-09 and in violation of the constitutional procedures of the Soviet Union.
Russians constantly forget how Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia ended up in the USSR. The Soviets seized them in collusion with Hitler. Of course, now the orcs don't call it an occupation, but a window of opportunity.
A window of opportunity opened, and the Soviet leadership, realizing that we had come to an agreement with Germany, understood that the Germans would not defend the Baltics. England and France have no time for us. There's a war going on the Western Front, and so a window of opportunity opens when these territories can be returned to the Red Empire.
What the hell are you actually even talking about right now?
The forceful seizure of independent countries with the help of Nazi Germany, that's a window of opportunity. That's the kind of history they have in Russia now. Moscow doesn't even deny that the USSR was an ally and accomplice of the fascists. And today, the Kremlin uses the same logic. They see another window of opportunity. The speech by the extra chromosome Medinsky isn't meant to justify the past attack on the Baltic states, but to justify the one that's coming.
The Baltics. Shortly after that significant period, the Baltic states, specifically Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, were once again brought back into the expansive fold of the great Soviet power. Well, in general, it should be said that there were real dictatorial regimes in the Baltics. There was no democracy there at all.
Under the guise of Zapad 2025 exercises, Russia has begun moving troops into Belarus, closer to the Baltics. The orcs did the same before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Back then, they built up forces under the pretense of Zapad 2021 exercises.
Today, large-scale military exercises Zapad 2021 have begun in Russia and Belarus, as well as in the waters of the Baltic Sea. During these exercises, they will be practicing scenarios involving the outbreak of conflict, which is connected to, in quote, increased activity of illegal armed groups, separatist and international terrorist organizations with external support. Ukraine and the European Union are closely monitoring the exercises.
After the so-called exercises, the Russian troops did not leave Belarus, and 6 months later, they moved in columns toward Kyiv. After Zapad 2025, they might pull off the same thing. The president of Ukraine is already warning Europe that Belarus could become a staging ground for an attack.
We have very clear intelligence that this coming summer, Russia plans to send its troops to Belarus under the guise of extensive military exercises. However, this is precisely how they deployed their forces before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Are these Russian troops meant to attack Ukraine? Maybe. Or maybe not. Maybe they're meant for you?
Another factor indicating that Russia is preparing to attack the Baltic countries is the destabilization of the situation within them. Society is being shaken up in every possible way. Claims of discrimination against Russian speakers, accusations of Nazis and fascists, and the alleged persecution of FSB agents and Kazakhs.
There are more of us, and Russian is our language. There you go.
This is the Latvian equivalent of Medvedchuk Alexei Roslikov, a businessman, politician, and staunch Putin supporter. His Russian-speaking jaw just can't get used to Latvia's official language.
Would you like Russian to be an official language within Latvia?
Well, you know, they will certainly put me in jail for that, right? You are a provocateur. Is this a provocative question?
In Latvia, of course.
Not a state language, but an official language. Today, everything that concerns Russian speech in the Republic of Latvia will end in an article. So, well, you understand perfectly well that the answer and position on this question is a ticket to nowhere. Yes, exactly. I think that my daily work, my struggle, speaks very clearly and vividly about how I see the situation and how I believe the future should develop in our country.
It's very symbolic that Roslikov called his activity My Struggle. And do you remember who else had My Struggle? A certain German artist with a rather amusing mustache. Coincidence? We don't think so. Rashists are modern-day fascists. Everyone should know this, and they are deliberately engaging in subversive activities in other countries. In June 2023, the Rashist Roslikov demanded the removal of a poster from the National Library that read, "The Russian occupier is the best fertilizer." Apparently, it's because people like Roslikov will be the first to welcome the Russian occupiers. Now, Roslikov is aiming to become the mayor of Riga. Do you know why? To return this city to the Russians.
Today, I am fighting for the position of mayor of Riga, and this drives nationalist parties absolutely crazy. But the formula is simple. Either the national alliances with New Unity will continue to run our city, or we will take it back. If they stay in power, then taking away, banning, cancelling, and expelling people from the country and the city will remain the absolute norm and become even more entrenched. Or we will restore respect for ourselves, make them understand and acknowledge that at least half of this city consists of people whom you do not hear today. These are the people you are ignoring today.
Did you notice the wording is exactly the same as the pro-Russian forces in Ukraine back in 2014? We are not being heard. The playbooks are printed on the same printer from Lubyanka. This Russian worm and his party achieved a fantastic result in the municipal elections. A grand total of 1 deputy from their side made it into the local parliament. And where is that half of Riga that dreams of the Russian world? Somewhere in Roslikov's wet dreams.
Oh my!
Pro-Russian forces have become more active in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Russian politicians are openly making territorial claims against the Baltic countries. And the Kremlin is conducting military exercises in Belarus. There's something to think about.
Use your head and really think about where you live.
The American think tank, the Jamestown Foundation, which thoroughly studies authoritarian regimes and complex hybrid wars, has recently published a detailed report describing the significant threat of a potential Russian attack on Latvia. The authors of the article write that Russia is secretly deploying new motorized rifle divisions and modern artillery systems, including North Korean equipment, in regions near Latvia, and is also forming a strategic reserve. Belarus is turning into an operational flank bastion. There, infrastructure near the Latvian border is being modernized and large-scale exercises are being conducted, simulating offensive maneuvers. The development of infrastructure in northwestern Russia, particularly the modernization of railways and depots, also indicates preparations for a possible rapid invasion of the Baltics. The Americans even describe a possible attack plan. It is assumed that the occupiers will bypass fortified areas in Latvia and try to seize important roads and airports. They won't necessarily need to capture the cities. It will be enough to block them and paralyze logistics. The orcs will try to isolate Latvia from Lithuania and Estonia. The main goal will not be the classic seizure of territory, but rather the division of the country and the isolation of Riga. After that, Russia may issue an ultimatum ceasefire in exchange for all of Moscow's demands: the Russian language, the Suwalki corridor, and withdrawal from NATO.
It is necessary to change their legal status, make them neutral states, organize their withdrawal from NATO countries, as in fact the president suggested when talking about red lines back in 2021, and thus actually solve the problem. Otherwise, they will keep causing us trouble forever.
But what about NATO itself? It would have to respond to Russia and enter the war, unless, of course, it has a formal reason not to do so. And the Kremlin will give NATO such a reason. They will declare that Russia did not attack the Baltic states. It is the local pro-Russian militia fighting for their rights against tyrannical regimes. All that nonsense about civil war, tractor drivers, and miners will start pouring out. It's possible that everything will be done by the hands of Belarusians, who of course were treacherously attacked by Latvians and Lithuanians.
And now I will show you precisely where the attack on Belarus was being prepared for.
The Kremlin is counting on NATO not wanting to fight for the Baltic countries and gladly taking advantage of the absence of Russian insignia on soldiers, so as not to trigger Article 5. And here the question is for NATO. Do they really need to keep bowing down to a backward, failed empire? The Kremlin only understands strength. Any attempts at appeasement only further fuel its expansionist ambitions. Europe and the entire Western civilization truly need to unite and be more decisive in effectively dealing with the aggressor. It is finally necessary to impose tough, comprehensive sanctions and arm Ukraine to the absolute maximum in order to utterly destroy Russia's economy, decisively defeat it on the battlefield, and ultimately bring down the Russian Reich.
I would like to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. Our goal is not to mislead, but to highlight humor. Please take it with a smile.